Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. World leaders condemned the deadliest Russian attack on Ukrainian civilians this year after a Kremlin missile strike killed 34 in the city of Sumy on Sunday. More on that in a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Berlin considers sending long-range missiles to Ukraine. Brussels wants to speed up accession talks for Western Balkan countries. And Serbian students ride to protest against the government in Strasbourg. Russia is ramping up attacks against Ukrainian civilians. 34 people were killed and more than 100 wounded in the city of Sumy as they gathered for Palm Sunday celebrations. While most world leaders have strongly condemned the terrorist attack, US President Donald Trump dubbed it a mistake. Jeremy Hołodniuk reports on the deadliest Russian attack this year. Be advised, the following material contains some graphic footage.
Residents of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine have begun to mourn their dead as rescue workers continue to sift through the rubble from Sunday's deadly attack. But the sounds of explosions and the shouts of victims still echo among the ruins. This body cam footage released by Sumy police shows the shock and horror of the first moments after the attack. This boy asks police officers to ignore his injuries and instead help his critically wounded mother. She didn't make it.
The number of killed and wounded on the street, in public transport, in cars that were passing by, proves that it was a terrorist attack solely against civilian population.
World leaders were quick to express solidarity with Ukraine and condemn Russia for adding yet another position to the long list of war crimes it has committed since the start of the war. The reaction of one leader, however, was far from one of condemnation.
Well, I think it was terrible, and I was told they made a mistake, but I think it's a horrible thing. I think the whole war is a horrible thing. I think the war is, for that war to have started, is an abuse of power.
As usual, Moscow says Russia only strikes military or military-related targets. But the growing number of attacks and casualties in Ukraine calls these claims into question.
This Friday marks exactly 1 month since Russia rejected the American proposal for a full and unconditional ceasefire. They are not afraid, and that's why the ballistic missiles were launched. That's why there are hundreds of drones attacks every night.
For the Polish foreign minister, the attack was a mocking response to Ukraine's openness to an unconditional ceasefire.
I hope that President Trump, the US administration, see that the leader of Russia is mocking their goodwill, and I hope the right decisions are taken. Thank you.
2 days before the Sumy attack, the US Special Envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, met Russian leader Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg. Any tangible results of the US-Russia dialogue, however, have yet to materialize.
Putin promised to Trump to stop bombarding Ukrainian energy infrastructure. That didn't happen. Then Russia was interested in a ceasefire in the Black Sea area. That didn't happen either because of too many conditions from the Russian side. But the main thing now is full-fledged ceasefire.
While there have been many attacks like the one on Sumy, there is no getting used to the horrors of war. And as long as a ceasefire is not reached, many more innocent civilians will continue to die.
The death of the Sumy attack has just risen to 35. The EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas condemned Russia's recent deadly attacks on Ukraine. According to the foreign policy chief, the spate of strikes shows that Moscow doesn't want peace but war. The blistering comments came hard on the heels of foreign ministers meeting in Luxembourg to hash out the 17 sanctions package against Russia and further support for Ukraine, which could be developed at an upcoming UK-hosted summit. More from our EU correspondent Angela Skudgens in Brussels.
The EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, launched a broadside against Russian President Vladimir Putin at a press conference following a Foreign Affairs Council meeting in Luxembourg. She criticised that leader for his inability to commit to a ceasefire. It comes after days of violent attacks on Ukraine. We're talking about the 4th of April assault on Kharkiv, which has left at least 20 people dead, as well as the Sunday attack on Sumy, killing at least 34. Let's take a listen to what the EU's top diplomat had to say.
Ukraine agreed to unconditional ceasefire already a month ago, and yet we are seeing that Russia alone wants war, because we see the deadliest attack just yesterday, Sumy airstrike over the weekend, and it is clear that they are stalling and not wanting peace at all. So the only way to get Russia to negotiate seriously is putting some more pressure on Russia.
Ongoing support for Ukraine. This is exactly why those foreign ministers met in Luxembourg on Monday, to figure out a way forward for the EU to continue supporting that country as it weathers another year of Russian invasion. Now, this support will come in the form of a 17th sanctions package targeting individuals that are propping up the Kremlin's war machine, as well as those murky shadow fleet vessels. On the way out, however, from this meeting, we heard from Poland's top diplomat. This is Minister Radosław Sikorski. He blasted Hungary for that country's continued stalling of Ukrainian accession to join the EU, as well as other concrete initiatives to support that country. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We know that we have one country, Hungary, that lacks the moral clarity that we have when it comes to Putin's attacks, because Putin talks about peace, yet bombs civilians and kills children. The victim agrees to a ceasefire, and he either escalates the conditions or the attacks. This gives us moral clarity, but it seems that not all countries are guided by such principles. I have once again appealed to Hungary to lift its veto on the release of nearly €7 billion from the European Peace Facility, and also to stop blocking the opening of the first negotiation cluster. But it's like talking to a brick wall.
But to add some firepower to these discussions, Europe and the UK will meet at a summit in the British capital next month. The aim is for those bodies to sign a defence and security pact. The aim is to pool resources to continue support for Ukraine, as well as Europe's shared defence architecture. This is all according to a newspaper story published in the Financial Times, where ambassadors used an opportunity at a recent NATO coalition of the willing meeting to gather steam for these high-level talks. Angela Scoogens from Brussels for TVP World.
Kyiv has its own proposals regarding the currently negotiated rare earth minerals deal, says Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Olha Stefanishyna. Will the Ukraine-American agreement come to pass? We're joined now by our Ukraine correspondent, Oskar Tadzi. Good evening, Os. So should we expect more troubles in Washington-Kyiv relations?
It's unclear. We have very few details given to us by the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, Olha Stefanishyna. She refused to decline to give further details about the proposals that were being sent. These are proposals happening following technical discussions, they call them, between the US and Kyiv about the mineral deal. So these are proposals that the Ukrainian side are now making. However, we do, from the Ukrainian side, they are expecting further negotiations following these proposals. There certainly seemed to be confidence in the way that Ms. Stefanishyna was describing things, saying that if we will keep negotiating until there's an agreement, basically, but no more details on the ground about that. So really, it's unclear how far they expect those negotiations to go into the future. Certainly no sign of signing anything at the moment.
That was Oskar Tadzi reporting from Kyiv. Thank you very much, Os. Stay safe. German Chancellor in waiting, Friedrich Merz, wants to provide Ukraine with long-range Taurus missiles. Merz believes they could be used to target the Kerch bridge connecting Crimea with Russia. This signals a major shift in Berlin's policy towards Ukraine, as the current Chancellor and Merz's future coalition partner has long opposed any such move for fear of angering Moscow. Sonia Gatabishchan reports.
Germany's Chancellor-in-waiting Friedrich Merz demonstrated Berlin's openness to back Kiev with long-range Taurus missiles. In an interview for German channel ARD, Merz indicated that Taurus missiles could be utilized to target Russian military infrastructure in occupied Crimea.
Our European partners are already supplying cruise missiles. If it's coordinated, then Germany should participate in it.
The development follows a Russian missile attack in Ukraine's Sumy, which killed 34 people, an event Merz referred to as the Russian president's war crime. Merz's approach to the Taurus missiles stands in stark contrast to that of his predecessor. Olaf Scholz has rejected repeated pleas to supply Kiev with the weapons.
Why I do not consider the delivery of Taurus cruise missiles, the variant used in Germany, to be appropriate. They could only be used if, it must also be said, responsibility for target control is shared. However, that is something I cannot and will not take responsibility for.
There is some talk that the Ukrainians could not do the targeting on their own. I think that's outright wrong. They can be taught to implement and target the systems with only minor German involvement. The British and the French are providing similar capabilities.
That is not to say that the incoming German coalition government of the CDU, CSU and SPD is unanimously associated with supporting Ukraine. Former Ukrainian ambassador to Germany, Andriy Melnik, was among the first to express his doubts.
If Russian President Vladimir Putin reads this foggy coalition agreement, he can open a bottle of Crimean champagne.
Recalling Russia's 2014 annexation of the Ukrainian Crimean Peninsula, but experts indicate that what Merz anticipated as Chancellor and the Finance and Defense Ministries likely taken by the Social Democrats, support for Ukraine is expected to rise.
When it comes to Ukraine policy, it will be determined by the Chancellor in strong coordination with the Finance Minister and the Defense Minister. And there we will see a continuation with Pistorius and the new incoming Finance Minister, Klingbeil.
As for the makeup of the future Merz cabinet, Visegrad Insight placed its bet on Johann Wadefull as Germany's next foreign minister. Wadefull was recently in Warsaw with the Polish FM engaging in soccer diplomacy. And Germany's expected support for Ukraine does not stop with the incoming coalition government. Despite being in the opposition, Greens may have differing stances on other points, but have historically been staunch supporters of Ukraine. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
The enlargement to the Western Balkans is a clear political priority for the European Union, says European Council President Antonio Costa. On Monday, EU's top official praised Albania's progress in meeting accession demands and announced his plans to visit all 6 Western Balkan countries next month. We're joined now live by our European correspondent, Alex Kadier in Brussels. Good evening, Alex. What more can you tell us about the EU's plans concerning the Western Balkans?
Good evening. Well, a clear statement of intent from Antonio Costa, the EU Council President, making it clear that, as far as he's concerned, it is a priority for the EU to have these countries join as quickly as feasible. And that is my language, of course, but that's very important to explain that this is about a process of reform, a process of joining the European Union. These countries are going to have to reform their laws, their economies, their standards, things to be able to be aligned with their soon-to-be fellow member states. But we heard from the Polish foreign minister who was chairing this meeting, Radosław Sikorski, about the importance of this accession for the European Union. Let's have a listen.
In the current overall challenging geopolitical situation, enlargement remains, of course, at the front of EU's policy agenda. The Polish presidency supports a merit-based enlargement of the EU, and now more than ever, welcoming new members is a geostrategic investment in peace, security, stability and prosperity.
With Minister Sikorski at this meeting, of course, with Edi Rama, the Prime Minister of Albania, who said that he wanted to see his country joining the EU by 2030, therefore closing accession negotiations by 2027, a target that he recognized as ambitious and that a lot of work would need to be done. The Polish Foreign Minister, Radosław Sikorski, adding that that work is absolutely worth it if you look at Poland's experience since 2004 within the European Union, certainly economically. Another point, though, to bring you to another meeting earlier today, we heard from Kaja Kallas, the EU's top diplomat. Very interestingly, she was asked if possible future member states attend the 9th of May celebrations in Moscow, would there be a response, showing that this is as much about reform as it is about values. Let's have a listen to what Kaja Kallas had to say.
Any participation in the 9th of May parades or celebrations in Moscow will be not taken lightly on the European side, considering that Russia is really waging a full-scale war in Europe.
Kaja Kallas there drawing a clear line. Any attendance on the 9th of May celebrations in Red Square would be taken very badly indeed here in Brussels and elsewhere. We heard support for Ukraine expressed by Edi Rama, by other countries that want to join the European Union, but certainly some of those Western Balkan countries will have to think twice now before heading to Moscow.
That was Alex Kidier reporting from Brussels. Thank you very much, Alex. Sometimes you need to pedal hard to make your voice heard. A group of Serbian student cyclists are on their way to Strasbourg to protest against the situation in their country. Our correspondent Paweł Trzaskowski has joined them in Germany. Good evening, Paweł. So what more can you tell us about this quite unusual protest?
Well, the penultimate stage of the Tour of Strasbourg, as it's known in Serbia, has just concluded. The cyclists, about 80 of them, have already entered Karlsruhe in Germany, and this means that they have already covered more than 1,300 kilometers. They set off about 2 weeks ago from Novi Sad in Serbia. Novi Sad is Serbia's second largest city, and this is also a place where in November last year a concrete canopy of a railway station collapsed, tragically killing 16 people. And this incident sparked mass protests, with people taking to the streets opposing what they believe is a corruption and state capture by the government and the country's president Alexander Vučić. And in fact, these protests that have been continuing for 6 months now, they prove to be the biggest challenge to Alexander Vučić's political career. And this bike ride, the Tour of Strasbourg, is another installment of these protests. The cyclists set off from Serbia. They cycled along Hungary, Austria. They are now in Germany, and they are greeted in all these places by members of the Serbian diaspora. Tomorrow is the last stage of this ride. They are hoping to reach Strasbourg in France, and we will be here. We will be there to cover this for you. Back to you, Martin.
That was Paweł Trzaskowski reporting from the German city of Karlsruhe. Thank you very much, Paweł. The third conference of the European Space Agency is underway in Warsaw. The discussions are focusing on the outlook for building a resilient and robust Europe-wide space industry. Zuzanna Jurek was on site and has more.
Monday marks the start of the third European Space Agency's conference, taking place here at the Royal Castle in Warsaw. Among some of the attendees, we expect to see Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former NATO Secretary General, as well as Krzysztof Paszyk, the current Polish Minister for Economic Development and Technology. Now, amongst the key topics of discussions are the financing mechanisms which are necessary for the deployment of space and security sectors within the EU, as well as some of the innovations, including AI technologies, which might be used in future applications. This conference is, of course, taking place as part of Poland's rotating presidency of the EU Council. When Poland took over the presidency in January of this year, it took it under the motto of Security Europe. As part of this conference aims to highlight the critical role of space and emerging technologies, as well as governance and financial frameworks necessary in shaping European security landscapes in the years to come. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
China's Xi Jinping embarks on a diplomatic offensive in Asia to mitigate the effects of US tariffs, which led to freezing of trade between the two global powers. Can Beijing form an anti-Trump coalition, and what response is Washington ready to issue? Meanwhile, Brussels wants to appease Donald Trump by large purchases of American liquefied gas. And to talk about it all, we're joined by Cordelia Buchanan-Ponczak, research fellow at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, who specializes, among other things, in global trade. Good evening.
Good evening.
So Europe finds itself caught between a rock and a hard place in this trade war between Washington and Beijing. So do you think that Chinese diplomacy can exploit this fact and, somehow set closer economic ties with Brussels? Or would it ultimately, be against Europe's best interest?
I mean, certainly everything that's going on right now is underpinned by uncertainty. Uncertainty of how things are going to go, what the United States is going to do, certainly what China is going to do. And you were right to say that Europe is between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, certainly the Commission and Ursula von der Leyen have stressed that they are very open to negotiations. They certainly put their reciprocal trade tariffs on hold after Trump put his on hold for 90 days. We can see the overtures that China and Beijing are making. But then also with China, I think that the European Union has to walk a delicate line for a couple different reasons. Specifically on trade, I think that there are concerns that if the trade tariffs do stay on China from the United States, that actually Beijing might dump some of those things in the markets of the European Union, and that could really hurt local European Union industries and have, second and third order effects. On the other hand, I've also heard an argument that the European Union could serve as a sort of re-export hub for Chinese goods, where if tariffs stay very high on China and if they stay lower on the European Union, that businesses might be incentivized to reroute things to the United States through the European market.
To bypass the tariffs.
Well, it wouldn't exactly be bypassing, but it would be exporting from a lower tariff market than the Chinese one, which isn't very hard to do right now, given that that 145% is still standing and the EU is back down to that 10% baseline.
All right. Now, the question of American LNG, as I mentioned in the very beginning, is again on the table. So should Europe fully switch to American gas? Well, in order, first of all, to hurt Russia's economy and to help Ukraine, of course.
It's a good question. I think that on one hand, looking at American partners as a source of LNG is a good direction to go. On the other hand, definitely the European Union has learned the costs of relying on one partner for its energy needs. And I think that there will be some very risk-averse leaders in Brussels, as well as in the individual European Union member states. But I actually want to pause on this LNG for one moment, just to point out that Europe, that Poland actually it buys more from the United States than it exports. And one of the reasons for that is because of LNG. U.S. LNG makes up a huge part of Polish imports, and that has happened after Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. And so certainly Poland can see some of the shift to U.S. LNG, but how others in Brussels will see that is a question. And then the second thing when it comes to buying U.S. LNG is that I think that European leaders must be wondering right now how much the Trump administration and the Americans can be persuaded by these large purchases. And then if a deal is struck, whether the United States can be counted on to stick to the terms of that deal. Because as I started out with uncertainty, one of the big questions here is, what is a trade deal with the United States worth right now?
Mm-hmm. Right, you've already mentioned that there could be problems with certain EU members, right, to conclude such a deal with the US. And I'm wondering about Hungary in particular, because on one hand they have quite good relations with Moscow, but then again, Viktor Orban always said that he's playing in the Trump team. So how is Budapest to act?
not just Budapest, but I would also include the Czech Republic and Slovakia, not just because of the way that they have talked about the Trump administration, but the hard place of their industries, specifically the auto industry, and the opportunity to maybe blame Brussels for not taking better negotiations, better overtures with the Trump administration. That's one conversation that's playing out. But then the other conversation that's playing out is the effects of these tariffs on their local economies, on their local industries, and what will happen if no negotiation, no deal can be struck. And again, just to pause on something like the auto industry, because certainly Poland feels the effects too. Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, all of them, as members of the European Union, have to allow the primacy of the Commission to go forward with these negotiations, but certainly they have to be able to advocate within internal meetings for their sectors that are so important to their domestic GDP.
Mm-hmm. Donald Trump has announced he would introduce new tariffs on the import of semiconductors and some microchips, if I'm not mistaken. Now, who will be affected the most by this decision? China again?
I would like to say actually the whole world will be affected. It's hard not to begin with that huge scale. Something like semiconductors, certainly the supply chains for that, streaking through the Indo-Pacific, parts of Europe would be impacted by that as well. The United States, China, everybody feels the uncertainties of a decision like that. And I think one of the striking things over the weekend is that the markets really want to believe that Trump is going to roll some of these tariffs back, specifically on China. You saw some of the exemptions come out over the weekend, and immediately the markets responded. There's a lot of hope that this volatility will go away. But it hasn't gone away. Every 2 days, there is something new. And so I think when we talk about who suffers from tariffs on something like semiconductors, certainly global markets and the appetite for investment, the appetite for risk suffers. And that has add-on effects to basically every market that you or I could name up here.
I'm also wondering about Trump's voters, whether they would applaud, if they were to pay twice the price for their smartphones. I guess not. Well, Xi Jinping is visiting Vietnam today and will later travel to Cambodia, Malaysia as well. Well, how strong is the American position in the Southeast Asia, and can China hurt its interests there?
Yeah, I think that one thing that we have seen is how hard Trump's tariffs hit these countries that really feel like they're between, well, again, rock and a hard place with the United States and China. I would say that what the Trump administration said, that many of these countries were trying to strike a deal. Then we have this pause on tariffs. This is maybe a bit of a carrot and stick approach to see how countries return. But they're leaving an opening for China to come in and say, you can rely on us. We will be dependent. We won't change things every couple of weeks. Going back to what I said about who can trust what the Trump administration says right now about trade negotiations and the ability to uphold a final deal. And I think that those countries must be watching that very carefully right now.
Right. Now, Leslie, because we can see that the tensions are definitely growing between Washington and Beijing. Now, what is this breaking point? Where's the red line? Where will it transform from a trade conflict to a war?
Goodness. Well, I do not have the answer to that. I think some people would say that we're edging toward a trade war. And my colleagues and I at FIA, we look at geoeconomics, and part of our idea is that countries at times will use economic means instead of traditional military means. But certainly, economics and empirical data have shown over the years that when the economic situation is deteriorating, actually the chance for a hot war becomes much higher, not just among these big players like the United States and China, but actually among smaller players that begin to face political economies and deteriorating situations at home, and up the incentive to undertake perhaps land grabs or to get control of resources. So it is very possible that all of this uncertainty will lead to a hot conflict. Whether and where, I can't say. The later, the better. Never, probably, is the correct answer. Cordelia Buchanan-Pączek, research fellow at Finnish Institute for International Affairs, was our guest today. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
And thank you for watching and stay with us for much more news and features here on TVP World.